to relive my story again, not only on my side, but in business. But before we get going, it's quite incredible that you and I agreed on this topic such a long time ago, and it's so pertinent at the moment. And I was also thinking that after Jason's amazing discussion and presentation, you might need to move your wine tasting forward to lunch.
Yeah. But let's just start with you, because you're the CEO of OrbVest, and OrbVest is a partner of ours, and I know a lot of you here have actually invested in OrbVest, so you're talking to quite a few of your investors as well. But just from your side, you really had a spectacular career here in South Africa. We've heard of what Transaction Capital has done. Bayport, company that you were very intimately involved with, and I think you can just take us through that story, if you don't mind, on your travels and what got you to decide to leave South Africa.
Well, perfect. So I actually live at the moment in New York, in Westchester. I've been there for 4 years. And, the interesting thing is people always say to me, did you intend to immigrate? And my answer was, absolutely not. I used to say, seriously, I'll be the last person to turn off the light. And so in my journey, I started in KZN, an ex-urbanite, and, had a great time building businesses. I love to start businesses literally from employee number one and grow them to scale. And as I went through my journey, I spent 15, 16 years in business here, and then moved into financial services in Gauteng. And it was over that period that we really grew Bayport. I was the co-founder and CEO to significantly sized business. And then my partners at the time were the founders of Transaction Capital, so who are now quite famous after buying We Buy Cars. And so it was that transition that we sold the majority stake to them around about 2011, 2012 that actually led to part of my journey into immigration.
So take us from there. What took you from having a pile of cash, having the opportunities that we know exist in South Africa, to trying your luck elsewhere?
So what actually happened was, it was quite fortuitous. Mark Lamberti from Massmart at the time had just sold out to Walmart, and he had taken over the reins at Transaction Capital. And what happened was, when we sold the majority stake to them, he actually said to me, what do you want to do with your life? And I was thinking about what's the next thing I want to get involved in with. And it just so happened he said to me, well, what about going to Harvard and doing an executive management program? So spoke to my very kind wife, who said, get on a plane and go to the US for 6 months. And I was there, and it was during that phase that I had an epiphany. And that was the one night I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I was walking around in Boston, and I was over the Charles River, and I looked around and I saw all these youngsters walking around, and they just had no worries in the world. And I thought about my kids. I was in Joburg at the time, and I thought, I really miss that. I grew up in Durban. You used to run down the road to your friend's house, and they're just freedom. And make no mistake, on the counter side, South Africans have an incredible life here. And it was then that it started to really set in, what about this thing called immigration? I was terrified to speak to my wife, because I knew she was in favor of it. And like most people, generally in couples, there's one that often wants to think about it and one that doesn't want to discuss it. So it was that difficult decision on the way home on that flight. I remember saying, am I actually going to open this door with my wife or not?
And when you did?
It was not an easy discussion, because before that there were always a whole lot of concerns. Once you open Pandora's box, it's not so easy. And especially at the moment, what's happened in the last couple of weeks. I know that for a lot of people it's on their mind. I get calls pretty much every single week from people in South Africa, and I know it always goes, well, I got your number from so-and-so, I just phoned to find out about your business. And then comes the question, how did you get into the US?
And so how did you? What was your journey into, and why? Well, maybe start at the beginning. Most South African immigrants go to the UK.
Yes.
Timeline, football, rugby, speak the same language, shitty weather, but there are other family connections. Some go to Australia, but the US is maybe a little bit different, a little bit of a different decision to go to that country. What took you there rather than the UK?
So when I was in the US, there were two things that I really liked. The first thing was I thought, great place to potentially bring up kids in their future, given the fact that I was deeply concerned also, like, what does South Africa hold for my kids for their future in terms of, employment, opportunity, triple B, double E. And then also, I was in Gauteng, which is, in many ways very different to either Cape Town or KZN. And I was deeply concerned about my teenage kids driving around at night. So it's the same concerns I think we all share. And I know I've still got family and friends here and they share the same thing. So, that was the one aspect. The other aspect was my current journey, which is when I was there, I looked at the fundamentals and thought, pretty nice place to invest. They seem pretty stable. And my second passion was real estate. And so I came back and had the discussion, and then I also started to look about real estate and possibly investing either overseas in the UK or in the US.
That's an interesting decision. When people emigrate, generally they go to a job or some job that they have, or they got enough money not to worry about working again. Going into a whole new society that you don't know much about, it's outside your comfort zones, and now you want to go and invest there as well. How did you tackle that?
Well, the biggest challenge, and I think when I speak to people, it really comes down to three things when you start to talk about immigration. The first thing is, without a doubt, how are my kids going to adapt? How is my family going to adapt? Are they going to settle in? Are they going to be okay? Because we underestimate in South Africa the second most important thing, and that's our network. We've got a huge network. We've got friends, family, everything's a phone call away, no matter what it is in business. Jason was mentioning he probably got hold of a couple of people he knows in his network, and they were there to support him. And then the third thing is, for most breadwinners, it's, what am I going to do? How am I going to make a living? It's expensive overseas. And it's easy if you're going to a job, as you say, but if you're not, it's a real challenge.
Okay, so you've now spoken to your wife. She hasn't thrown you out the house. How did you convince her to think that emigration was a possibility? And surely the family is also involved in this.
Well, in fact, the family wasn't, and I think that fear of disclosure is so important for most people in South Africa. When you decide to immigrate, the most important thing is, until you're actually comfortable to let everyone know about it, you simply just can't mention it because of your job, your family, your friends. It's very traumatic for people, and especially your kids, to rip them out of school and take them overseas. So for me, I'm a very, should we say, emotional type person. I don't really want to put my family through that kind of stress. So I almost saw it as a building phase. I said, look, I've got to start to make sure that I am comfortable that I can transition. So I don't think it's an immediate yes, no. It's more of a transition. So I thought, look, if I can try and at least set up myself to earn some dollars or invest overseas, wherever that might be, at least that'll hopefully set the platform for me then finally immigrating, if I decide to immigrate. Because it wasn't certain at that point.
Mm-hmm. And when did you actually leave?
So I left in 2017.
And any thoughts of coming home? And when you first arrived there, it looks so good from the outside, but once you're in, there is a different reality of living in a foreign country for us.
I would have said maybe 1%, but after Jason's topic, no. I think South Africans always see it as this is home, and when I left, I called it a journey. I said, I'm going on the Freeman journey. So you go there a couple of years. If it doesn't work out, you can always come home, and it does happen. But I think certainly, there's pros and cons to immigration. Make no mistake that in South Africa, as I say, we have a good life. We've got these amazing support structures, and there's a lot of pros to it. And South Africans still make a lot of money here. When you go overseas to a place where you have no network, and it's tough, and the transition is there, it's also difficult. And being over there when you have situations that arose in the last couple of weeks, it's even more difficult because you're far away and you feel lonely and you feel like you need to support everyone. And so a huge shout out to everyone for what you went through and managing to come through the other side and being strong in this process.
We spent 3 years in the UK, Jeanette and I, 2016 to 2019. We went there for a year and we ended up spending 3, but we got the business started. But I found there were two types of people who emigrated, and I'd love to get your view on this. The people who primarily left South Africa and did okay elsewhere were those who were not entrepreneurial, those who work in organizations who might have hit their heads on maybe black, white, colored, Indian, well, not so many black people, but colored Indian and whites, who felt that they were hitting their ceilings in their careers here. And they sought opportunities elsewhere. And then there were the entrepreneurs who went elsewhere because they saw the world as a much bigger stage on which to play. Of the two groups, the entrepreneurs often, those that I met, found that yes, it might have been a bigger stage, but it wasn't really. As I often say to people, when we got to Heathrow, there was no red carpet waiting, and the Brits didn't say, come and take our business from us. It's a tough world if you're an entrepreneur. However, those who are happily emigrated are often career-type people. What's your thought on that? And you would have met many South Africans who have located elsewhere.
So I think what's interesting at the moment right now is, the phone calls I'm getting are across the length and breadth. White, Indian, black, you name it, who all just say the same thing, I love the country, I want to stay in the country, but sure, I've got to think about my kids. Often I think if it's not for kids, most people wouldn't leave, everything's here. But what I will say to you is that there are, in my opinion, which I say to people, 4 different stages of immigration. And so the first year is, I call it the honeymoon phase. Everything's great. It's a new toy. You go to new places. It's just fantastic. You probably experienced the same thing in the UK. And then the second year it starts to set in, and you're like, wow. So this is really my world. I'm away from friends and family. By year 3, you're starting to build your own network and a few friends in that. And then year 4, you're on your way. And that's pretty much how it plays out with most people. But I have to say that technology has played a huge role in immigration. I like to tell people that there are 2 things that have fundamentally changed everyone's world, and that is WhatsApp, and certainly WhatsApp, in terms of my kids arriving, they're on FaceTime, they're showing everyone exactly where they are, what's happening. You're able to talk to friends and family every single moment of the day, so that immediate break is no longer there. And then Waze. Yeah. It's the craziest thing. You get out in the middle of, whether it's the UK or America, you want to find a Chinese restaurant, you don't even know where you're driving and you arrive there. So everything just feels so much more simple compared to people that possibly did it a decade ago.
Yeah, when you said WhatsApp, I was wondering what your second app was, because definitely my number 1 was Waze. You just can't get lost with Waze anymore. Before we open up, I'm sure there are lots of questions. Reg Bamford is a South African. He played in the croquet. He's the world champion on croquet. Seriously? I don't know if you knew that croquet had world championships, but it's a very, very competitive sport, and I think if you're the best in the world, it is. Anyway, Reg started a business in the UK called Sable, and I remember just after I arrived in London, I went to see Reg, and he said, I don't think people should ever emigrate from South Africa. It's a fantastic country, but you must send your money somewhere else. And I know Magnus Haystack has got similar opinions, but we'll hear from Magnus tomorrow. What's your thought on that as a concept before we start going into the questions that people will have for you?
So I think the important part is the next journey of my immigration process. I would never have immigrated if I hadn't found the way to be able to immigrate. And that led me on to my current role. And so what happened was that I wanted to now figure out, how do I get my money overseas and actually let it start earning pounds or dollars? And it was extremely difficult. At the time there was no real players around that were doing it. There's difficult taxation, legislation, it's compliance. America, you need a social security number, there's debt, and it's far away. So how on earth do you do it? And that's when I started to really seek alternatives, and I started to invest overseas, and I found my current partners. So what was interesting is that I went through a journey of investing like most people do. I'll tell the story that went over to the US and bought my first 2 houses in Atlanta. You want your own bank account, you want the title deed, you don't trust anyone. Everyone overseas is going to take our money. And I did the same in the UK, only to find that returns in residential often are very different. In your first year, it's everything works, it's fantastic, but by year 2 or 3, maintenance kicks in, and your returns drop. And then obviously we found our way towards commercial and commercial real estate and my current partners.
But I think it's an unusual journey for you in that you found other entrepreneurs who'd also made a lot of money,
Yes.
and were then able together to almost pool your resources and to look at how you could then invest offshore, but in a more hands-on area. How did you find medical? Where did that?
So what actually happened was that, in looking for people that were potentially investing overseas and trying to do the same thing as I was, it wasn't easy. And so, Justin and myself were invited onto a board, my partner Justin Clark here, and we met Henny Besodenhout. At the time, Henny was very bullish on medical real estate because something he said really resonated with me. He said, that one thing with doctors and dentists and healthcare professionals, they're part of the community, they stay a long time, they sign long leases. And I just thought, what, I'm looking for a decent return, but that low risk. And so we started to invest, and I'll never forget, the first deal was Medical 2. I invested in it, and they were promising me 9% cash on cash. And at the time in South Africa...
In dollars.
In dollars. And at the same time, I'd gone through 8% in, the houses and apartments in the UK. UK a little bit less, you expect more capital growth. And I was completely skeptical, as I think most South Africans are. And we invested in it, and all of a sudden it started to generate better than expected returns, 10%. And I couldn't believe it. And I was a private client with FNB, Investec, and also 361 with SAR. And every time I sat down with them, I said, I'm earning this return in dollars, and one year it's Greece, then it's Brexit, then every year you got a different excuse why I'm not generating the same returns. And so really it was through that phase of my, business career that we started to then get more involved. And we suddenly realized there was a huge need, not only for what we were doing, but for others in South Africa to do a similar thing. And then, of course, it started to go international. And it wasn't just that we had the same stresses and desires to try and earn dollars in foreign currency, but it came from almost every country in the world.
One of my friends who went to Canada said, it's the great indoors, so the climate is a big problem. But what I don't understand is, have you considered Africa for immigration, and also doing business in Africa? And one of my friends I spoke to, a very big guy, I said to him, aren't you thinking of investing offshore? He said, I've got good investments in Mozambique.
That wasn't Total.
So, I've actually done business in Africa through Bayport and various other businesses I've been involved in, and it certainly has its challenges. And, you spoke about the potential envelopes in Africa, and I just felt that it wasn't part of my value system. But the one thing I do like to often tell people is I was on a flight from Joburg down to Durban, and one of my friends is an economist in South Africa, well-known person. And he was telling me a story that he gives at conferences. And I said, listen, if I'm ever at a conference, I hope you don't mind if I use it. And he said, go ahead. So he says that when he's speaking to CEOs and investors, he says, let's play a little game. So let's take ourselves and put ourselves on another planet. Now we're looking at Earth. And you can invest 100% of your money anywhere on the planet. He said, so what percentage would you put in America, in Europe, in Asia, and then Africa? And then let's dumb it down even further and go down to South Africa. What percentage of your total wealth sitting on that other planet would you put into South Africa? And he says it's like an aha moment with most people. They look at it and they think, wow, I better start to rebalance my portfolio. And that's the point. I think that, even if you look at people in America, they're looking to get their money into other currencies. So I think it's all about diversification and making sure that you haven't got all your eggs in one basket.
And I guess Piet Viljoen, who's going to be talking tomorrow, would put it, the most important thing is don't lose the egg. Don't lose any of the eggs that you're putting into that basket. Rob Hersoff, you came back from, again, a fantastic career internationally, an entrepreneur internationally. Now, it's almost like you got divergent views, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on Martin and maybe some questions.
Sure. So I didn't have my hand up for a question there, so he picked on me. So I was born in 1960, and I did, Ridge, Michael House, UCT, 2 years in the Army as an officer, and then I left the country in 1985. And I went on my own to America, got a job at Goldman Sachs in New York, and spent 31 years of my life, I'm 60 now, so half my life overseas. And in 2017, came back to South Africa with my New Zealand wife and my 2 younger children, who are now 9 and 6. And my New Zealand wife said, I don't get Fynbos, but I really don't get Joburg. We're going to live in Cape Town. So we ended up living in Cape Town, where I've been for 4.5 years. And I don't know anyone else that's come home. My generation have gone, all of them. I can name you names. They've all gone. They're all overseas. Their children are overseas. Many of them were born overseas and will never, ever come to South Africa other than on holiday. So my generation's gone. And there's a massive brain drain since my generation left that's going. I got a call 40 minutes ago from Chris Chadwick, the CEO of my African Gold Acquisition Corp SPAC, 40 minutes ago, to say, I need to let you know we're going to leave South Africa and go to the UK. Teddy Kuzwayo, who's a young Michael House old boy who's 33 years old, came to see me on Friday in Cape Town to say he and 2 friends of his, both black, all 3 black, have decided to leave. Could I help them get jobs in London? Which I said I would. And then on the flight up here 2 days ago, I always talk to people on airplanes. I enjoy that. There was a couple sitting next to me, and they'd just gone down to look for a place to live in the Cape, to move from Durban. They're from Kloof. And this is just, this is in the last 4 or 5 days. So there's a huge brain drain. There's a mass immigration outside of South Africa of the educated people of this country, the ones who should be here building businesses, and the younger generation that leave won't return. For Australians and New Zealanders, all of them want to get out of the country and see the world, but all of them know they're going to go back to Australia and New Zealand. When South Africans leave, they won't come back. I'm the only one that has come back. But I've done so because I can. Most of my wealth is overseas. Most of my businesses are in London or elsewhere. And the ones I haven't written off are doing very well. And the businesses that I run from Cape Town, from South Africa, are in the main generating dollar-pound revenue offshore. So I can afford to live in paradise. So, people are not coming back.
That's a really good comment. Thanks, Rob. And maybe you can pick up on that. Again, it talks to that point of we live in an amazing country with great opportunities, but high risk.
So I think it also goes beyond even the risk. I think for myself living in Joburg, we all know people that their kids are living overseas. And so what it came down to my wife and myself, primarily, once I'd figured out that I could actually earn dollars overseas and the world wasn't so scary over there. What's also sad for South Africa is as more and more South Africans move to places, when you're the first fool who goes to Westchester, New York, that's the tough road. When you know 10 people there, then it's easy to follow them because then it's not so scary. But certainly in terms of my elder daughter, she had 10 friends in school, 8 are gone. They're overseas, which is terrifying. So we just felt we didn't want to be that family that one's in New York, one's in Australia and New Zealand, and we're sitting by ourselves in Joburg, and we wanted to give them the opportunity. But make no mistake, I'm someone who's a huge proponent of South Africa. Places like Cape Town and that are absolutely magnificent. I know friends there that are doing so well, their kids are so happy, and South Africa is filled with potential. As Musi said earlier, it really just takes a decisive change in leadership, and this country has everything going for it. There are people that want to travel here, and we say if it wasn't for certain things in South Africa, no one would leave. And that's very, very true. Myself, I ended up finally immigrating because I saw the value of being able to position myself as CEO of OrbVest in New York because I felt I could grow a global business, offering solid returns to people around the world, seeking the same thing that myself and Justin and Henny and the rest of our team had found ourselves, that little eureka moment. And just to talk a bit about that eureka moment, Alec, when you are told that whatever you have is wealth, You need to go overseas and it'll generate 6%. You know, another aha moment for me was when I realized I could actually generate 10, 11% cumulative in dollars. You know, all of a sudden that's a game changer. You know, suddenly you need half the amount to either retire, or alternatively you're worth a lot more money when you start to earn dollars overseas. And the last part of it is that you don't have to leave. You know, once you start to get those offshore dividends, you can stay in South Africa. And as I often say to people, if the rand goes to 20 to 1, who cares? You'll just earn a lot more rands for your dollars.
Which is a little bit like Rob's experience as well.
You talk a lot about lifestyle. So surely in America you have a lovely lifestyle as well.
Look, there's no doubt. I mean, I've really enjoyed my journey so far. You know, it's we took a tough decision not to go to Florida and Boca, which felt very safe and very nice. We wanted to go to where there were 4 seasons. As I say, anyone who ever goes to America, they're going to pass through New York for at least 2 nights. And I just felt that if you're going to run a global finance business, you need to be in New York. You know, and when you go over, Rob will know that the numbers they talk in New York and America, you realize as big as the South African economy is and the numbers we talk here, it is on a whole nother level when you go overseas. It is significant. And South Africans are very well respected overseas. We've got a very hard work ethic. People really respect us. We've done well. And as they say, if you can make it in Africa without challenges, you can pretty much make it anywhere.
So what is the answer to that question, should I emigrate?
So I think there's no answer that is a silver bullet. I think that when it comes down to immigration is absolutely unique to every single family, to every single situation, and that also depends on kids, the stage of your life, the way you view things, as I say, where you live, and your experience. So, we all know a lot of people that are very, very happy in South Africa. They have concerns. But I think you're a great example, Alec. You've come back and you've made a great go of it, and you're building an amazing business over here. And you've spent time in the UK. Maybe it was the weather that pushed you away. But certainly, as we move forward, I think that South Africans are given opportunities of a number of countries, Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, wherever it might be. And the challenge is that for the South African government, what's most astounding for me is they don't understand the brain drain, as we've spoken about. And it's really sad for me because, I look around in Joburg when friends of mine leave or when I left, and it's not just the leaving. It's when you go to the local Woolworths, the turnover drops. When you go to the local gas station, their turnover drops. The insurance company, it's every single thing that you touch in your world, their turnover drops. And that for me is very, very sad. And so I think my plea to the South African government would be, you need to really acknowledge this and do more things to make sure people stay here and just really make sure that they don't leave. What's more astounding, and I'm not sure if anyone actually knows this, when you immigrate, the reason why the stats, in my opinion, are so skewed is you don't fill out an immigration form. So everyone in South Africa that's supposedly overseas on a holiday or left on vacation that never came back, it's not known that they immigrated. Most people I know that are overseas have never filled out a form that said they've immigrated. So that's the reason why I think the South African government still has a different perception of the actual numbers of people that live in Australia or elsewhere in the world.
Oh, there's also different priorities, I think, for the government, in that they have a different constituents. And their constituents don't really care if one less voter, who isn't going to vote for them anyway, leaves the country. So that might be part of the whole thing. But I think the one thing that strikes me, and that we are, as in our side, as we say, but if you want to globalize, globalize. There's no shame in it. There's no shame in taking your South African ingenuity and going internationally, like you guys have done. I mean, how many projects have you got now?
We're up to medical 35. The portfolio is $400 million.
$400 million from Martin Freeman going to New York to drive a offshore business. And your strategy is to get to NASDAQ.
we'll over the next couple of years grow it by about $150 to $200 million a year. Our goal is that when we get to $1 billion, OrbVest will look to seek a listing on the NASDAQ. And what we're finding more importantly is that what I'm talking to you about is so strange. You'll go to China and they'll be talking about crime, corruption, got to get my money out, and eventually they'll say, are you talking about your country or South Africa? and it is so similar. Brazil, the same situation. They all want to get their money, if possible, into a first world country where they can just earn the stable dividends. That's what we offer, 7 to 8% cash-on-cash dividends, and total returns of between 11 and 17% overall. But the one thing I do want to mention is, I like to say to South Africans, unfortunately, South Africans spend a disproportionate amount of their time thinking about the wrong thing. And that's sad. I remember in South Africa, every day you're looking at, your rand dollar. And when it goes the right way, you're feeling great, and it goes the wrong way, you're feeling terrible. And it's like the proverbial roller coaster. Whereas generally overseas, life is a little bit simpler, unless maybe you've got a president in a country that is a bit controversial.
Yeah, I guess the guys in China would swap with us as well in a heartbeat. There's also levels of it. But those 35 properties,
yes,
when you talk about 150 million a year, that's quite a few more properties that you're going to be adding.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are targeting a minimum of 10 to 12 acquisitions per year. And it's really just driven off the demand. So as the story continues to grow, we've got amazing teams and people in South Africa that want to co-invest. And I think what we say is that even within diversification of your wealth, and you're going to hear great speakers, you've got Magnus and others that are offering offshore solutions, diversify. And even within each stream, even if it gets to real estate, diversify within real estate. And so people who invest with us, we encourage them, even if they came to us with an amount of money, spread it over 5 buildings, so that you start to build a mini portfolio. And so when you do taste those consistent dividends, it's quite amazing. Everyone says, I can't believe it. I didn't know you could actually do that. And it's become so simple. I think it's also through technology. We still ourselves believe in the old school of helping people, holding their hand. And so what OrbVest exists for at the moment right now is to help people seamlessly invest from around the world into only US healthcare real estate and then get it seamlessly back to them every quarter. And it's working well.
Why do you think we punch above our weight in the business community internationally? And you start thinking about the South Africans who have Elon Musk, everybody knows, but the owner of the LA Times, the owners of Monster Drinks. I don't know if you know that, but it's a couple of South Africans who own it. And when you start totting it up, there is an enormous, for a tiny little country with 0.6% of global GDP and far smaller percentage of a first world society here, we really have done well. Why do you think that is?
South Africans have to fight hard. It's not easy to run a business in South Africa. That's for sure. You're overcoming challenges every single day. So when you go to another country, your first thing you're thinking about is, okay, I need to build a nice little business. I need to cover my overheads, make sure my family's okay. And then all of a sudden you realize that whichever country you're in, there is scale. And when we say scale, there is proper scale. And not only across that country, but across multiple countries. So immediately you're exposed to this concept of real globalization. A person in Australia is not thinking Australia. He's immediately thinking Australia, New Zealand, Asia, and other countries. And so that's the difference between being in potentially the bubble. And you mentioned Africa. The only real expansion we think of is into Africa. Whereas overseas, you're just thinking on a different level, scale and globalization. And it actually is not that difficult because everyone around you is doing it also. I mean, there's not a person that I don't come about who has grown a business and then gone across America. And America alone is 50 states. And then they're thinking about Canada on their doorstep.
Betway, Vitality are doing amazing work in the UK as well. So we do have some very, very interesting examples. Last question, sir.
Martin, sorry, could you tell me, did you formally immigrate when you went over, or do you go on an extended holiday?
So I would call it an extended holiday. My wife would call it formal immigration.
Okay.
But we certainly went over and, we settled in pretty smoothly. The one thing I can say is that the younger the kids, the easier it is. Funny enough, just in terms of immigration, I'll also tell you a story that out of my 3 kids, I've got one that's 22 that's in Manhattan now, and then a 19-year-old who's just gone to college. So I'm about to return to only one left in the nest. And my social butterfly is our eldest, and she finished school and she left. And when I got there, I was quite astounded that it was most difficult for her. And the reason why is because it's an absolute known fact that when you finish school overseas, most kids then disperse and go to college. So even if I met someone and you had someone who was at the age of 19, 20, they're not there. They're off at college, and then all of a sudden, at the age of 22, 23, they come back. So we've certainly seen with friends, the younger the kids, they just seamlessly slot in. Within a couple of months, they've already got that, should we say, the twang in their language. But I also like to mention a story, is that we have a friend who's a very well-known developer in real estate. They went over in the 80s, and they built an enormous, amazing island called Williams Island in Florida. And I was sitting talking to him, and he had actually gone over in the 80s and established this development with 2 brothers called the Trump brothers, no relation to the other famous Trump. And they've done very well. And so he said to me, what is your advantage? And I said, well, hopefully I'm a nice guy, transparent, I've done, the whole usual. He said, no. So we carried on debating, and I said, well, tell me. He said, it's your accent. And I was like, my accent? So he said, yes. He said, when you go into a room as South Africans and you hear a French guy, you'll always remember Jean-Michel, the guy with the strange accent. And it is so true. When you go into a room overseas in any country, the first thing they say is, oh, amazing, you're from Australia. And you say South Africa, and then they're fascinated. They want to know, tell me about your story, and they remember you. So we stand out from the crowd, and I think that is one thing that certainly helps us.
Maybe in the US, not so much in the UK.
One more here.
Last question.
The reason we are emigrating out of South Africa, one of the fundamental reasons must be education, or the lack thereof. And I think that's, besides the current government having different interests to seeing this country prosper, they've also lacked the interest of actually getting the education up.
I'd counter that. I'd counter that with a company called GetSmarter.com that was started by South Africans in Cape Town, which they sold to you, listed on NASDAQ for 1.8 billion rand. Never heard of them because they were private. They've now gone into a business called the Valencia Institute, which is a high school which is done remotely under the auspices of UCT. So I agree with you. Public education for sure, not so clever. But a boer maak 'n plan, and we're marking a plan here in this country. My children, if they were of course way past that age, but today they would go into doing something like that, remote learning, and getting actually a head start on other parts of the world. So education is not the way it used to be. It's being transformed dramatically if you look for places for it. So 2 sides of the argument. And I forgot Roelof Botha, by the way. Roelof Botha is the top venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, the son of Roelof Botha, the economist, the son of Pik Botha, the former cabinet minister. So there's another name, and I'm sure the more we think about, the more these big names will come through. But do you want to just close off with a response to the education story?
So education certainly is one of the primary concerns, as we all know, whether it's in South Africa or overseas. I think South Africa's got some fine institutions here, as we know, certainly down in Cape Town and Gauteng, and then overseas as good institutions. The fact is that overseas it just costs a heck of a lot more to educate your kids there. So there's certainly options over here. But the one thing which I just want to end off on really is that term called options. And that's what we certainly believe at OrbVest, and I believe. The issue of immigration is so topical, and South Africans are also resilient, so it goes through its phases. We all know of, 3 months' time, please God, we've actually beaten New Zealand in Australia. It's the one thing that the rugby is the glue that binds ex-SAFAs together all around the world. And, the moment things move on, life seems to go back to normality. And I just say to people that there are options that you can grow your wealth around the world, which then gives you the option of you can stay in South Africa and enjoy it. You can then educate your kids overseas, or if you eventually do decide to immigrate, those are all options. But so that's the great thing about it. It's simple to now be able to create those options, as opposed to in the past, I think we were all trapped and we only really had one option: stay or go.
A different mindset.